Today we're interviewing Paul Anderson, who is a lifelong resident of Plattsmouth. And he worked at one time for the Burlington Railroad at the shops, and that's kind of the main reason we're interviewing him today, because there aren't many of those people left, and we want to find out a little more about that business that was located here in Plattsmouth for, when did they start,
The shops?
the shops?
1880,
80,
probably.
58, I was
Because the
somewhere,
train came through.
way over 100 years ago.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And they closed here in 1967 and moved the shops to Havelock.
Yes.
And Paul went to Havelock and continued his career there. Paul, is there anything that you would like to just tell us about your job at the shops?
Well, I started let's see, it was 1965, and I worked there about 6 months, and then they started talking that they were going to close the place, and I didn't know which way to go, whether to quit and try to go to Union Pacific, in Omaha or not, and I decided, well, I'll work there until they close it, and then I decided, well, I've got a little bit of seniority, so I'll just hang on here and move out with them, and so that's what I did, and I don't regret it one day yet, so.
Paul, do you recognize this? It came from the shops, and it appears to be,
It is.
That's a payroll book, isn't it?
well, maybe so, there's on the back.
Okay.
It's got dates
Okay.
and salary,
Yep.
dates,
It's
And then
payroll.
on the last line is transferred to Havelock in December 18th of 67. I'm going to take a picture of this.
That's a payroll book, actually.
Okay.
And they kind of kept record of us down there. I think I started, I was drawing, seemed like $1.50 an hour, but I'm not positive.
I don't think that's
But
on.
it was big money then, for me. And so I liked that real well. And
What kind of work did you do there?
well, I tell you, I worked in I don't know whether you want to hear this, but I worked in one of the roundhouses for a place called W.E. Katie's, and they did farm machinery work. And I did that when I was in school and during the summers, and they taught me how to weld. And so that's why I was willing to go over to the railroad, because I already kind of had a trade, and I worked there, but then I went over to the railroad, and so that's kind of how I got. It was in one of the railroad's roundhouses at the time. They had 3 roundhouses to start with, and they didn't use the one, and that's where the W. Katie's rented that roundhouse and started to build farm machinery. And so, but then I heard the railroad was hiring and jumped right quick over to that, and of course I knew quite a few of the employees already, because I carried their papers for them, really. And so I knew a lot of them, and so I went to the bosses in the railroad and asked them if they were hiring, and they said yes, and they said, I said, well, I'd like to see if I can join, and it was Herbert Hoover, he was the assistant general foreman, and he said,
Herbert
yeah.
Hoover?
Herbert Hoover.
Wonder who he was named after.
Not the Herbert Hoover.
And so he said, yeah, and he took my name and all that stuff down, and then the next day, he called me and he seen me down there, and he come over to me and he said, when do you think you could go to work? And I said, well, just as soon as I can tell the company, the W. Katie's, that I'm quitting and going to go to work, because it's always nice you give them 2 weeks notice, I went over there. I told Warren Rylander, I was going to work at the railroad, and he said, good. And I said, well, I wanted to tell you 2 weeks that I was quitting. And he said, nope, no, you're not quitting. And I said, well, yeah, I am. He said, no, he said, you're not. He said, you're gonna go to the railroad and work, and then on Saturday and Sunday, you're gonna come over here and work for us again. And I said, well, okay, fine, you know. And so that's the way that kind of went and got started. And that's kind of what I did too for quite a while. But anyway, yeah, that's how I got started on a railroad. And I started out on the railroad as a laborer. And I was doing a little bit of everything, whatever they sweeping the floor, whatever they wanted me to do, but I didn't care because it was pretty good money. And so then in about a month and a half, then they moved me up to a helper, and that was better, a little more money. They moved me up there, and that was good. And I worked for, I don't know, about another 2 months as that, and then they come and told me that they wanted me to go into the apprentice program, and I said fine. And during the apprentice program, you have to work 1,040 days to get your carman's card, and vacations, time off, weren't there, didn't count. You still had to get 1,040 days. And so I entered that, and they had me doing sandblasting and different things like that, you know, and working with the other carmen in the wood shop and different places. Every 4.5 months, I believe, in the apprentice program, they were supposed to change your jobs, so you kind of knew the whole system of everything. And that's what they were doing, and then of course it come up that they were going to close the place, and so that wasn't one of my better times because I didn't know which way to go. And anyway, so I stuck with them, and then when we moved to Havelock, as I went to Havelock, they had already junior mechanics that were helpers, and they were paying them as mechanics. Well, when we went in, there was 6 of us young guys that hired on, and when we went up there and got in, they had to pay us carman's wages because they had the other already there, and the union says you got to pay them, and that was about almost $2 raise. Wow, you know, I was.
Who were the other 6 from here that?
Well,
did?
one was Larry Walden and Al Gansmer, and I'd have to look back in my book there and tell you the other ones. And but they hired. It seemed like they didn't hire. Platzman didn't hire anybody until they were about 6 short, and then they'd hire about 6 new employees. And Jerry Sayers, and I can't remember the other 2 right.
You brought some information with you. Is there anything there that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I've got all kinds of information here. And I think the museum already has that because I think I've seen it down here. It seemed like I have pictures of the last car that we worked on down at Platzman's shop, and everybody took their picture, and there's a copy there, but I got the original. Well,
I think
There's
we
a-
might have this.
I think you do have. I'm pretty sure
I'll
you do
just
have.
put
But
this
what
on
you
camera.
Number 78.
but what you don't have is you don't have this here, and that's the names of all of them.
Oh,
And
you know, we
they're-
need to make a copy of that then.
And they're, yeah, you sure can.
Is the
And,
real-
and they kind of tell where they're at, like in the first row and.
He has
and
the original picture there,
The
too.
name.
Yeah, this one's just, I thought that might be too glossy is what I'm thinking.
Oh, yeah, that's the original, or kind of
Yeah,
like the
I'm thinking it
original.
might be too glossy for the
Oh.
camera.
Yeah, and
Let me,
there's the names.
Let me read the copy.
And,
Yeah.
And so I thought that was pretty important, you know, all the names of all the guys. There's about 115 of us went out there and about 6,
We might
7
have it,
carloads each day. And some of them moved, some of them retired, there was about 12 guys that went to Union Pacific.
So do you think
After a while.
all of these people lived in Plattsmouth, or did they come from other places to work?
There was about 3, and they're all with the same name. I'd have to look on there. But they came from around Glenwood, Iowa.
Okay.
But other than that, all the rest of them
Really?
were from Plattsmouth, yes. And
So now tell us exactly what the shops did. They built railroad cars?
when they first started out, they built railroad cars, they built engines, the engines there, they built a few of them brand new. And then they built regular cars, and towards the last of this, they built refrigerator cars that had ice bunkers in them, and that's what the picture is. And they hauled swinging beef in it from Omaha stockyards, and we'd work the ends of each end had the hatches so they could dump the ice down in it, and then and meat rails through the center of the car, and they'd hang the beef with hooks onto these meat rails and carry them in and hang them up, and then they'd take them to different areas, and that was one of the main things. But and they built a few. CB&Q called them way cars. Other people call them cabooses. They built numerous, and just I got stuff in here. Numerous. They built numerous way cars. I call them because I was CB&Q more or less. And then, yeah, they built them, and and then they built milk and cream cars, and they insulated them real good, so they didn't really have any ice in them. But evidently they didn't take them too far because you couldn't haul them too far.
So they were a liquid container?
No, they were in cans, all the
Oh,
cream
I
cans
see.
and
The cream cans went
and
in
the milk
this.
cans, and
So
they loaded them into the
The
car.
box cars they were building pretty much looked alike. They were wooden on the outside.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. They were, and then later on, they built a few cattle cars, and that was, and they used to have at the north end of the shop, no, south end of the shop, they'd bring the cars in, and they'd full of cattle, and they had to put the cattle out before they could work the car, so they'd take it and had a big pen out there, and they'd let them out and feed them water and feed and everything, and then they'd work the car, and then they'd load them back up.
And that was kind
send
of
the
at the
car.
south end of what is now
The
Rhinelander
south end of the
Park.
shop, Rhinelander Park, yes, ma'am. And,
Paul, what do you mean work the car?
well, like new wood, new flooring if it
Repairs
needed,
that might
needed
be
it, maybe some new braces, mostly safety appliances, which is grab irons and things like that, hand brakes and stuff like that. And then maybe redo the wheels under them, they call them trucks. And there's there's four of them, two at each end, the trucks, and they lift the car up, take those out, tear it all apart, and they were all journal cars at the time with brass friction, until they started with roller bearings later on in years. And so, yeah, they redo them all, and sometimes they'd even have to sandblast the car if it was a metal car, and then repaint it and everything, put the stenciling back on, the names and all that stuff back on, and the weights and all that back on it.
So
And fix up what
if they built a box car from the beginning,
Yes,
how long would that take?
well, I never got in on that, but I understand they could put out about one a week, the
Okay.
way I understand it. Now, that's hearsay again too, because I didn't get to build any cars when I was there. Havelock I did, but not here. And
And all of these people would be working on the same day? Or would this be
yes,
several
no,
shifts?
same day.
Same day?
Yeah, well, some of them might have been gone, but
Right,
yeah,
yeah, but
mainly same day.
This
yeah.
many people were
They're all-
working on
Yes.
any given day?
Yes,
That's a
absolutely,
lot.
yes,
And what
absolutely.
were your hours to work?
They were from 7:30 to 4:30.
Yep.
And
You
then
ring a
they-
bell,
And
always
they
have
had,
a bell.
they had in the machine shop, they had a great big air compressor with a steam whistle.
Yep.
And they'd blow and now everybody knew when the shops was
Yeah.
to go to work, and at noon and back to work, and then quitting time, because The whole town could hear
You
that
could hear the
air,
whistle all the
that air
time.
whistle all the time. And, yeah. And then when they quit, WKD's got the air whistle, I don't know whatever happened to it after that. But anyway, yeah, and so, yeah, that was a big business. They had, like I said, at one time, and this other stuff in here will tell you that at one time, they had over 1,000 employees down there.
Wow.
On the, and,
Anything else in there that I can put on camera?
well, no, this is about all the things that other ways. But, and then this was an article in the paper told about it. And when they quit, and
I think we have a copy of that.
I'm sure you do, I'm sure you do. And, then you probably got numerous of this too. They got some pictures of the car, they got the picture of when it burnt, the shops burnt down there, and a picture of the cream cars they built, and I think you got that too. Probably.
When did it burn?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, it must have been in the early 60s.
No, about 75, March of
Oh,
1975.
okay.
That, we were already gone.
Yeah.
We were gone,
Yeah,
okay.
and WKD's was there, and that's what got it started to burn, but it burnt the whole place, basically.
Yeah, I remember, Bill was a fireman at the time.
Sure.
Remember
I'm
being
sure he
down
was,
there
yeah.
At that
I'm
fire.
sure he was.
Paul,
Yeah.
going to have, about, I was wondering if you had a choice, if there were some that could not go because their particular job wasn't needed, or about how many did go? Do you have any?
There was 115 of us went out there,
Oh,
and we had, we could go out there or quit. Bottom line, basically. And they had positions for all of us, you know, in blacksmiths and welders and carmen and painters, and they had it all out to Havelock, you know. And
So
in fact,
this was-
Havelock got the job of building the engines, and I think that was 1911 they moved them out there. And
This was owned, everything was owned by the railroad,
yes,
and they just deemed it necessary to close this down and move everybody out there because they had
Well,
no room, or what?
you know, I've heard a lot of stories, but what they told us why they were closing the shops in Plattsmouth was that they were gonna quit using the railroad bridge over the bridge.
Anyway.
And they were gonna quit using that because it was old, and they were gonna quit using it, go up bypass, go up around through Omaha. Well, as you see, they still have it, and they're still using it. So that was a bunch of, you know what? And then, of course, then they built another one too, and they used one for the loaded cars, and the old one for the empty cars coming back.
So
But,
was there a switch station to get those cars from the railroad into the shop yard?
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry about that. They called it a turntable. In fact, that's what the picture is. Everybody that car sitting on the turntable. It was a steam turntable, and then they had to turn it over to, with a electric, kind of like electric drill to turn it later on. And they'd bring the cars from the depot down there and bring them up to there. And then they'd put them on that turntable, and then they'd put them in each of the roundhouse doors to be worked. And that's how.
So
they
how
did it.
did it connect? Did they go under the viaduct?
They went under the viaduct back then, of course, now there's.
It's not, yeah, it's not there
Yeah,
that way
but,
anymore.
yeah, they put it,
Okay.
I've got some pictures of that too somewhere. Anyway, yeah, they always, and they pulled them around with an English Ford tractor. And it was built, they had a different front on it, different back, and they pulled it with a chain and pull it up to the table, and they'd turn the table, and then they'd push it into wherever they wanted, what stall they wanted to go in. And,
So there had to be people on the railroad to unhook them and get them onto the
They had what they
line?
called a crane hooker,
Yeah,
and he unhooked all that, hooked it back up, and they'd pull them.
and those people worked for,
They're in that picture.
They're in
yeah,
that
were-
picture
yeah,
too,
they're in the
okay.
picture too. I'm surprised the tractor wasn't there. Frank Nichols run the tractor all the time. He loved that thing. I'm surprised it isn't in the picture. But anyway, yeah, that's how they did that. And, yeah, there was a lot of changes down there, you know, I forget what year it was, but the flood went through down there and tore up some of the buildings, you know, through there. And then they rebuilt, and I understood that they had a 100-year lease, and it was up, and so that's why they wanted everything out of Havelock too. And then they told us that the bridge, they were gonna quit using the bridge, but that was all.
100-year
That's obvious.
lease with the city?
Yeah, they
with
had
the city.
and then yeah, they had a 100-year lease with the city
Okay.
for the ground, and you know, that's a lot of years. And they pretty near used it all up too, I guess, and so.
So then the ground went back to the city, is that?
Partially, the way I understand it, it reverted back, and the railroad gave them the other part back, and then they had to go in there, and because the railroad contaminated it quite a bit, because they had diesel, you know, fuel and all kinds of spirits stuff, and lead and everything, because they made their own journals, brass down there, and brass foundry, and at one time. And like I said, the way I understand it, they had better than 1,000 employees down there at one time. I mean, so that was a big economy for Plattsmouth, and put them on the map, kind of more or less, the railroad did. And so, and then of course the bridge was there too.
It was my understanding that the city had to spend a lot of money to decontaminate the area.
Yeah, they had to, and there was so many different foundations that when they were digging, they found, you know, where they had a building of some type, and yeah, and then they ended up putting so much fill dirt over the whole thing, they had to, you know, because they're gonna make a playground out of it. They couldn't have that contamination. So they did that and made Rylander Park out of it.
So I know we talk about Katie's and Warren Rylander, and I assume he rented from the city, maybe initially from the railroad, and then to have his business down there. Were there others, after you went to Havelock, were there other businesses that went into some of those buildings?
No, not in Plattsmouth here, there was, no ma'am, there was, W. Katie's was the only one in there, and they rented the one part of the roundhouse, and they were in there for quite a while. They moved out of Omaha, W. Katie's did, came down there, and then I started working for them, and my brother did when it was in Omaha. That's how he helped me get a job. And
So it was there first, before the railroad?
No,
It was, came in after the railroad.
yeah, way after the railroad quit using that part of the roundhouse. And that's why W. Katie's got it building farm machinery stuff. And
So Katie was the name of a
W.
person?
Katie was the name of the company
Okay.
that was down there.
And you said you
Warren,
worked?
Warren and Clay Rylander was the bosses of it,
Yes.
part owners of it. But Walt Katie was the real owner that had it in Omaha.
Okay.
So you said you worked for them first?
I worked for them when I was in school, on Saturdays and during the summer and everything. I did a little bit of everything down
Because
there.
Dave was working there then?
Yeah, Dave was working there.
So
My
tell
brother.
us about your family. We didn't talk about
No,
that.
we really
Yeah.
didn't.
Your
Well,
dad and mom and brothers and sisters and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, my dad worked at the bomber plant and we lived in Union. And after they closed the bomber plant, then Dad was looking for a job, and he came, you know, went through Plattsmouth, so he signed up at the railroad because he thought they were hiring, and he signed up at the telephone company. Well, the next day, the telephone company called him, said, can you come up and we'll talk to you. And he said, okay. So anyway, he came up the day after that and got a job at the telephone company. And then about a week later, the railroad called him and said, come down here, we'll hire you down here. And Mom and Dad decided that maybe working for a phone company was maybe be a little better, because the railroad used to hire quite a few employees for building a certain type of cars, railroad cars. And then when that was done, then they'd lay them back off. And Of course, the folks kind of knew about that, and so they said, maybe you better stick with the telephone company.
So
I
what year do you
stayed-
think that was?
Would have been in about, what, 46?
After the war?
Yeah, after the war, after they
After they
closed the
shut the
bomber
bomber
plant.
plant down?
Yeah, what I do know about the bomber plant is, Dad worked on the Nola Gate.
My grandpa did too.
Well, of course he did. If he worked up there, he did.
Yeah.
Because they worked them in a line, and each outfit had their own jobs, and they'd go from plane to plane to plane to plane. So, of course, they didn't know it was Enola Gay at the time, but,
Right.
he worked on
But
it.
they did have a celebration, my grandpa tells me,
Yeah,
when it was ready to be shipped out, and they had a little, everybody who worked there got a little plaque or a little.
yeah, Dad had a little plaque,
Something or
a little
other. Yeah.
plaque, and, yeah. Yeah, Dad really liked that job. Well, he liked the telephone company too, because it was kind of the same thing, wiring and stuff. And
So did you move, your family moved from Union?
Then we moved from, because the telephone company said it'd be best if you lived in town.
Town.
And so we moved up here where I live now. And ever since. And then, of course, my sister was the oldest one, and we all went to Plattsmouth High School. We all graduated from Plattsmouth High School. And then my sister got married, and then my brother later on got married, and then I did. And my sister was a housekeeper, I guess you'd say. And my brother worked at W. Katie's there. And like I said, I got out and worked for him for a while, and then I went into the service, and then I got out and worked for him a while, and then I went to work for the railroad. And then when they moved, I moved out to, I didn't move out to Havelock. I stayed here, and I drove back and forth, 51 miles each way.